For as long as most of us can remember, the US dollar has been the absolute bedrock of the global economy. But what happens if that bedrock starts to show some cracks? That's exactly what we're digging into in this explainer, the future of the dollar. We're going to look at two very different possibilities: a sudden, dramatic collapse and a much slower, gradual decline. Just think about it for a second. What if you woke up tomorrow and the money in your pocket, the very thing that keeps global trade humming along, just failed? It's a pretty wild thought, right? But it really gets to the heart of what's at stake when we talk about the dollar's dominance. There's this great line from Ernest Hemingway: gradually, then suddenly. He was talking about going bankrupt, but honestly, it's the perfect way to frame this whole conversation. See, currency crises rarely just pop up out of nowhere. The pressure builds and builds and builds, kind of quietly in the background, until one day it doesn't. And that's the idea we're going to follow as we break this all down.
All right, so first things first, before we can even talk about the dollar's throne being in trouble, we gotta understand just how high that throne is. I mean, why is the dollar king in the first place? What makes it the undisputed cornerstone of global finance? Get a load of this number: over 88%. That's the percentage of all international deals that have the US dollar on one side of the ledger. It's just staggering. We're talking about the lifeblood of global commerce. From oil to soybeans, pretty much everything is priced in dollars. It's basically the world's money. And you can see that trust right here. Look at what central banks around the world are holding on to. Nearly 60% of all the foreign currency reserves held by governments are in US dollars. That makes it the ultimate safe haven asset. It's like the financial backstop for the entire planet. So what's holding this whole thing up? Well, it really comes down to four main pillars. First, it's the world's go-to currency for savings and trade. Second, it's backed by the biggest, most diverse economy on Earth. Third, it gives you access to the deepest and most reliable financial markets anywhere. And finally, let's be real, it's supported by a whole lot of US political and military power. All these things just feed into each other, creating this cycle of dominance.
But, no empire lasts forever. And even a foundation that strong is starting to show some cracks. So let's pivot and take a look at the challenges that are actually threatening the dollar's reign. And the thing to get here is that these threats aren't just coming from one place. They're coming from everywhere. You've got internal problems, like the US national debt just exploding, and monetary policies that, print a lot of money. But then you've got external pressures too. Big geopolitical shifts, other countries wanting to diversify their savings, and a growing backlash against the US using the dollar as a weapon through sanctions. Each one of these is like a little chip away at the dollar's status. And let's put a number on that internal threat, because it is a big one. Over $37 trillion. That's the US national debt. And look, the number itself is mind-boggling, but it's the consequences that are the real danger. It means massive interest payments, it puts pressure on the government to create even more money, which, hello, inflation, and it makes people start to question the long-term stability of the whole system. It's a major, major vulnerability. Okay, so all of this has led to this really important term you're probably hearing a lot about: de-dollarization. Now, this isn't some kind of all-out war on the dollar. It's more of a strategic, slow-moving shift. You've got countries like China and Russia and their allies who are basically saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be so dependent on a currency that we don't control, especially when they see it being used for sanctions. And this brings us right back to that Hemingway quote. We've talked about the gradually. Now let's game out the suddenly. It's way less likely for sure, but it's still possible. So what would a rapid, full-on collapse actually look like?
Yeah, a total collapse wouldn't be one single event. It would be more like a terrifying chain reaction. It all starts with some kind of trigger, a huge geopolitical shock or a financial crisis that just shatters confidence. That sparks a global panic, a massive sell-off of US assets. Then, as the dollar's value tanks, the cost of everything imported skyrockets, kicking off this insane inflationary spiral. All of a sudden, the US can't possibly pay its debts, and the whole world is left scrambling, trying to find a new anchor for the financial system.
And here's the kicker. This wouldn't just be an American problem, not even close. When over 88% of all global trade is done in dollars, the entire system would just break. Contracts would be worthless overnight, supply chains would snap, and international commerce, as we know it, would grind to a screeching halt. For everyday people, the fallout would be instant and brutal.
In the US, you'd be looking at hyperinflation, your life savings wiped out, the price of milk and bread going through the roof. Around the world, essential deals for things like oil would just fall apart. And in the financial markets, US stocks and bonds, the things everyone thought were the safest bets on the planet, would absolutely crater as everyone rushes for the exits.
Okay, let's take a breath. That collapse scenario is a lot, and it's important to understand how it could happen, but pretty much every expert agrees it's highly, highly unlikely. The far more probable future isn't a sudden crash, but more of a slow fade.
So let's just put these two futures side by side. On one hand, you've got the sudden collapse, a massive shock, hyperinflation, total global chaos. On the other hand, you have a gradual decline that looks more like a slow shift in trust, a much more controlled transition, and the rise of what you might call a multi-currency world, where the dollar has to share the stage instead of being the only star. It's about orderly adjustments, not sheer panic.
And you know what? We've actually seen something like this before. Just look at the British pound. After World War II, the pound was the global currency, but buried under war debt and with the US economy booming, its dominance just faded. It happened over decades. And here's the key. The pound never collapsed. It just found a new, smaller role in the world. The dollar could very well be on a similar trajectory.
All right, so whether we're talking about a slow decline or, something a little rockier, the big question is, what does any of this actually mean for you? How do you even begin to navigate a future where the financial ground is shifting beneath our feet?
Well, here are the warning signs the experts say to keep an eye on. First, a big sustained drop in the dollar index, the DXY. Second, you start hearing reports that central banks are aggressively dumping their dollar reserves. Third, and this is a big one, major stuff like oil starts getting priced in other currencies, like the Chinese yuan. And finally, you see signs that the US government is having a hard time selling its bonds to foreign investors. Think of these as the canaries in the coal mine.
So with all this uncertainty floating around, a lot of people are looking at diversification. It's really just about not putting all your eggs in one basket. Hard assets like gold have a long history of holding their value when currencies get shaky. Investing in stocks outside the US gives you a footing in other economies. Even holding some stable foreign currencies, like the Swiss franc, can act as a safe haven. And yeah, some are looking at things like cryptocurrencies as a totally different kind of hedge against the old school financial system. So at the end of the day, we're left with this huge question. Is the dollar's throne safe, or is the world marching into a brand new financial era? The dollar's power is built on this incredibly deep interconnected system, but the challenges from debt, from geopolitics, from this move toward de-dollarization, they are very, very real. A sudden collapse seems pretty unlikely, but a gradual shift, that feels like it's already happening. So the real question isn't if the world's financial order is going to change, but how fast and what it's going to look like when we get to the other side.